August OWASP Austin chapter meeting. Nice seeing everybody here. Today's meeting the food is sponsored by our LastCon conference, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then facilities is National Instruments. Thank you to National Instruments. I'm Tiana Chandler, the chapter leader. Also have listed up here our other chapter leaders. So we got Kyle and Kate here. I'm not sure if anybody else is here. So, but if you have any questions about anything with our chapter, you're welcome to reach out to them or me, and we'd be glad to talk with you more about it. For this meeting can be eligible for an hour of CPE, and if right now the way we have it set up is if you could just email me directly, I'll get you a certificate. Our meetings are open. You do not have to be a member of OWASP. However, there are other opportunities in which to actually give back to this community. And so for that, there's volunteer opportunities, leadership, speaker opportunities, local events. If you want to get involved, again, talk to one of us, and we'll be happy to talk to you more about that. If you do shopping on Amazon, if you happen to remember, there's the smile.amazon.com, and you can select OWASP, and then so a portion of your, that would be proceeds going to the OWASP Foundation. As far as OWASP membership goes, there are several membership options. And so you can actually get all this information off of the austin.owasp.org. Also from a membership, we have a membership coordinator, Paul Griffiths, right there. He can also provide more information. We do have a study group going on weekly at National Instruments here, but in a different building. Actually, right now, and Matt Pardo is our training coordinator, education coordinator, and he oversees that, but I'm not sure exactly which topic they're covering at the moment.
We're just starting the third chapter of the CCSP book, the Cloud Security book. It's the all-in-one book. We meet every Thursday at noon. Anybody's welcome to come. You can join whenever you want to, attend when you can. Just sit in, okay?
Okay, thanks, Griff. I actually have, there's some information on the austin.owasp.org. There's a tab there for the study group, and I'll make sure I get that information updated. So our conference, LastCon, Lone Star Application Security Conference, is coming up this year in a couple of months. We have the conference schedule. We're selecting those talks, and we're going to get the schedule set up and announced very soon. Also, the training, we've selected some of the training, and we're going to be announcing that as well. And anybody else have anything else you want to mention as far as? I'm sorry, what?
Just a quick plug, the ISSA is putting on a war game exercise. Dry run will occur September 11th at Secure Austin. Their offices are in the Google building downtown. And the prime event will be on October 2nd at Initech. And, you know, that nature of that event is we're going to have a breach occur. We're going to have a large stage of participants at a fictional organization respond to it. And then we're going to have an expert panel review how well did the exercise work, how well did the participants do, and we're giving away all the materials so you can bring that back to your organization. As an audience member, you'll be asked to be an investor or customer, so you'll also be a participant. You can use Slido on your phone to submit feedback to the participants, and that'll be fielded during the exercise. So if you need any more information, ask me, but look at Secure Austin, September 11th, Initech, October 2nd.
Oh, okay, well, thanks. Yeah, in regards to LastCon, though, the sales are still open for the tickets. I know probably a lot of people are really waiting for the schedule to come out, but really urge everybody, if you want to go ahead and purchase your tickets. We're going to have a good lineup, a great lineup actually of speakers. So we're really looking forward to getting that information out to you. Upcoming chapter events. At this point, we don't have any other training planned for this year other than what we're going to be offering with LastCon. And the Austin Security Professionals Happy Hour, we're going to have the next one in September 13th. That's going to be at Baby Acapulco's on Stone Lake. And other upcoming local events, just have a few listed here. I know ISSA has a calendar that lists a lot of things, and thanks again for the plug on the other one. And I do want to open now, so if there's any other events that anybody wanted to talk about or bring up.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. First of all, I'm starting to look at what kind of program in Austin we could put together that would address the high school grad, pre-college, for an apprenticeship kind of program in cybersecurity. I'm just getting information now, and if you want, I'll give you my card. The other thing is on Friday at Technology Advisors Group, we're going to have the chairman and CEO Tom Hogan of Coney, if anybody knows them or maybe works for them. They have been providing a mobile app development platform. They are now providing a thing called the digital experience application platform, which ought to be pretty advanced. I mean, a look out into the future we're going to have over the next 10 years with all the immersive tech and IoT and things like that. So I again also have information on that. I'll give you.
Thank you. And then just take a moment here, if there's any job opportunities that somebody at their company has any that's open, that's relevant to cybersecurity. And
Hey, I'm David. I work at All Clear ID downtown, and I have 2 job positions open. One is a more technical one, SecOps engineer, and the other one is more like a compliance policy specialist. If you have any interest, come and find me.
thank you. And now we'd like to present Brett Stewart. He's going to talk about deploying a secure NodeJS app with Docker and Kubernetes. Oh, I think there it is.
That's on? That's not on. Yeah, that's fine. I can use it. All right. This is testing. Is it working? Cool. Hi. So my name is Brett Stewart. I'm the CTO at True Fable. We're located here in Austin, Texas, and we are a developer-centric
cybersecurity platform. So our focus is, okay, all right. So our focus is educating developers on how to write secure code, because without that, then security professionals are just playing the cat and mouse game, and they'll never really catch up. So we kind of consider developers our first line of defense in the cybersecurity field. So what I'm going to go through today is kind of a high-level talk. We're going to go quickly over the basics of NodeJS security, Docker security, and Kubernetes. So I also, over on my Twitter, it's Brett_ATX, I have a poll for this to kind of go over what people want to hear more about. So after this high-level talk, we can start targeting specific audiences. So with that, the very first thing I want to shout out is the OWASP Top 10. I'm sure most people are aware of these, but a lot of developers aren't. 85% of developers I've come across, they don't know what OWASP Top 10 are. So this is kind of our first line of defense whenever going into a new business or trying to educate a developer. Is we just kind of quickly go over these. So with that, I'm going to go over to being Node.js specific, and that's going to go around Helmet. So Helmet's a Node.js application or package that kind of does everything for you. It's a one-hit wonder. So what it does is it hides what. Let me see if I can zoom in here. So it removes X powered by headers. So people who are kind of novice at penetration testing, they won't be able to determine what application you're running. More advanced users can get by this. And we kind of go over content security policies as well, and XSS filters, things of that nature. This is definitely, every Node.js application should have this pre-installed. And the next thing is to go over TLS, right? There's no reason not to have TLS on your website anymore. Let's Encrypt gives you everything for free. So, and then they automate the entire process. ESS has a great tool called Certbot. Certbot, you kind of choose, if you're running Nginx or if you're running Apache, and what system you're running on, Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, whatever it is, CentOS, and it kind of automates that entire process for you, so you should not have any issues setting up a TLS certificate anymore. And that's kind of high level, the Node.js side of things. I'm being very brief over that because the topic's been around for years and years now, but I kind of just wanted to give a few shout outs there. Where I'm going to be spending most of my time is in Kubernetes. So with Docker, actually, let me get my note here. So going back to Node.js real quick, a few things I forgot. If you're running Node.js, there's a tool that's built into NPM now. It's called a NPM audit. And basically what NPM audit does is, there used to be a Node.js vulnerability catalog that used to be used, and then NPM acquired them and built it directly into NPM. So when you're writing code, if you just run NPM audit, that'll go through and tell you, you're using these 5 open source packages and 3 of them contain vulnerabilities that are within other open source packages. And it'll also give you a way to automatically fix those, and if you can't automatically fix them, it'll tell you what to do. So let me give you an example of these vulnerabilities. So while we're kind of waiting for this to load, basically it's just a CVE catalog that's specific to NPM packages and Node.js specifically that kind of go over the vulnerabilities that are out there. Amazon also provides a great tool called Get Secret. So other than Node.js specific, a lot of developers, they don't manage their git ignore properly, and they also don't check for if they're committing like, your Amazon secret keys and access keys in the repo itself. So Amazon came out with a tool that you can run that kind of does that for you. It basically, whenever you run it, it'll scan your repo and it'll tell you, you have these secret keys for your Docker container or secret keys for Amazon or whatever third-party service you use. So you can kind of drill down. And git ignore, so anyone familiar with Git, there's a git ignore, and people they kind of commit all of their secrets and stuff like that within it. Don't do that, that's kind of bad. So other than that, we can get into Docker now. So Docker has a few different things to go over, right? So one, Docker has the ability for you to assign a GPG key to your Docker container, so that when your developers are deploying it or using something like Kubernetes or Amazon ECS to deploy your Docker container, you can assign it with a GPG key. That way, you can verify that it's a legitimate container and it hasn't been tampered with. So Kelsey Hightower, I'm not sure if many of you know who he is. So he works for Google. Yep, better. All right, sorry. So Kelsey Hightower works for Google. Anytime a new products come out, like Kubernetes or serverless functions, he's on top of it, and he always comes out with tutorials on how to better increase security within these new tools. Because most of the time, developers kind of grab the tools, use them, but they're not necessarily thinking about security, which leads to a lot of vulnerabilities. So he has a tool that kind of walks you through, how to use GPG and how to find your container, and how to associate that to Kubernetes. So basically what happens is you assign a GPG key to your Kubernetes orchestrator, and then whenever you sign a container with that, and when you do that, kind of the container comes down, Kubernetes says, yes, it was assigned with a GPG key or it wasn't. And this just goes back to, don't use Docker containers that you're not sure what's in them, or you don't trust the source. You should only use Docker containers that are trustworthy. And when you're kind of enterprise level, only use Docker containers that are signed by your enterprise. And then so a few other things, right, is Docker files. Don't use the same Docker file for production and for dev. You should use different ones because developers, they develop differently on their local machines in production. They should definitely be similar. But so an example of Node.js is, for development, you might use something like NodeMon to develop locally, but for production, you're going to be using something like Serve to serve the application. And these are just differences to kind of make it easier on you. So within Docker, Docker also has an open source tool it came out with called Docker Bench Security. So Docker partnered with CIS to start creating a list of Docker vulnerabilities and controls, and see how they can make it more secure. So there's a tool here, and basically it's an open source tool that you find on GitHub. You basically run it against your Docker container, and once you do that, it'll tell you, these are the issues that you're having with your Docker container or your Docker daemon. They're critical, warning, success kind of things. And they go back to a CIS Docker community benchmark, which you can download here. So this is free, and you kind of go check it out. And definitely utilize your Docker ignore whenever you're working with Docker files. So basically, just like there's a git ignore for Git repos, there's a Docker ignore for Docker files. And so a common issue with this is people will be deploying a Docker container to production, but they won't add anything to the Docker ignore. So a common scenario is your hidden Git folder is actually being committed with your Docker container, and that kind of makes it, releases it to production, and then it's a huge vulnerability, because with that we can get access to your source code and a lot of other things. And then definitely, so in your Docker file too, don't use exposed ports, right? Only use ports that you need. Typically, web application, you're only going to need, exposed port 80, or a lot of Node developers expose port 3000. So don't be just exposing all kinds of random ports and stuff in your Docker file, because that obviously opens up for a lot more. And that's kind of briefly Docker. So what I actually want to get into now is Kubernetes. So Kubernetes has a lot of issues because it's kind of new. It's only been out for a few years. People are still trying to figure it out. And majority of the time, people are deploying it and they don't really understand what's going on in the back end. So the first thing I want to go over is a common misconception, right? A common misconception is you deploy your Docker container via Kubernetes, and it's living in your Kubernetes cluster, and that Docker container gets compromised. A common misconception is just destroy the compromised container and all is well. But actually, if someone compromises your container, they have the ability to compromise your entire Kubernetes cluster. So you should always assume a compromised container assumes a compromised cluster as well. There are ways to minify this with like role-based access control and stuff, which we'll go over in a second. But that's like the number one misconception I see a lot of developers face. So to go over role-based access control. So Kubernetes has role-based access control. Basically, you can create service accounts and roles and bind them to actual processes and to actual containers, so that they're not doing what you don't want them to do. And so an example of this is a blog post by CNCF. They're a Cloud Native Computing Foundation. They kind of lead the way in Kubernetes and all cloud native applications, really. So a common misconception is RabbitMQ. So for those who don't know, RabbitMQ is a queue processor. It kind of, a process comes in, RabbitMQ can save it to the queue and do something with it later, so that you can kind of space things out. So most people deploy RabbitMQ, they use something like Helm Package Manager, which is like kind of like apt-get for Kubernetes, and they just deploy RabbitMQ, and they think all is well. But they're giving full control of their entire cluster to RabbitMQ. So it has a lot of vulnerabilities attached to that. So if your RabbitMQ is compromised, then your RabbitMQ can pretty much do whatever it feels like in your cluster. And there's no real way to audit that. So basically what you do is you create a role, so such as endpoint reader. So endpoint reader is just a role that says, I will give whoever's attached to this role, I give them the ability to read like other pods, for example, within my cluster, but they can't create, they can't delete, they can't modify. And so then you'll create a service account for RabbitMQ or MySQL, MongoDB, or your application, whatever it may be. And then you'll attach that role to the service account via role binding. And so now this RabbitMQ service account has the role binding attached, which inherits the role. So what this allows Kubernetes to do is when a RabbitMQ process is created within a pod, that process can only do read activities. It can't do create, delete, modify, nothing like that. So you can kind of start controlling processes in your Kubernetes cluster. I would say a good 80% of people don't have role-based access control initiated on their Kubernetes cluster. So by default, Kubernetes doesn't initiate that from default unless you're on Google. Google kind of forces you to do that, but they're a full, self-service. But majority of Kubernetes clusters are on Amazon now, which Amazon, they barely came out with their own Kubernetes service. So most people have just servers out there. They throw Kubernetes on it via an open source tool, and they think all is well, but that open source tool really does nothing security wise. It kind of just gets you up and running as fast as possible, which is kind of the issue with majority of developers. They they want to innovate, they want to create, they don't care about all the concerns that come with it. So they throw stuff up there, and we are where we are. And that's kind of high level what roles are in Kubernetes. So, and the next thing I want to go over is the Kubernetes etcd. So Kubernetes has an etcd, which is pretty much the simplest way to put it is a snapshot of your entire cluster. So whenever you create a secret in Kubernetes, that's being backed up in etcd. You can restore the backup and you can, initiate a snapshot of etcd. But long story short, if someone compromises your etcd, then your entire cluster is gone. They can download all your secrets and all your pods and deployments. They will be encrypted by default, but Kubernetes default encryption not that great. So we'll go through kind of the different types of encryption Kubernetes offers. And so to give a brief example of etcd and how vulnerable it is these days, so I'm not sure if many people are familiar with Shodan, but basically it's kind of the Internet of the Things search engine. You kind of come here to see what's publicly exposed to the internet and what ports they have open, etc. So just a simple search for etcd is going to bring up a ton of different IP addresses and Kubernetes clusters that have etcd public to the internet. As you can see, Amazon.com is #1 because most people are kind of maintaining their own servers and they're not really worrying about security too much. So etcd is always exposed on port 2300 by or 2380 by default. And so basically, with this URL, we can call something like, we can just do a simple GET request for, the IP address, the port /v2/keys, and if they don't have role-based access control configured, it'll dump all of the keys that are secret keys that are related to your application or your MySQL or your Mongo database in an encrypted format, and then from there it's just a matter of figuring out how to decrypt it. If they're using Kubernetes default encryption, there's quite a bit of reverse engineering out there that's already taking place in open source projects. And that's kind of an issue with etcd right now. So if you're on Google by default makes etcd not available to the public, so you're good to go there. You have the option to make it public, but it has a really robust API where you can do like automatic backups and stuff like that. So it depends on what you're doing that you might want to make it public or at least internal to your network. Which brings me to the Kubernetes encryption. So while that's loading, I'm going to go back to Kelsey Hightower's GitHub repo real quick to kind of go over this again, because I know I went over it with Docker. But so once your Docker containers are signed with the GPG key, then that gives us the ability to go into actual Kubernetes and create, upload our cert and our key to determine kind of, it gives the ability Kubernetes to check if this container is valid or not. And so if it's not valid, we're always going to get this message right here, no signatures matched for this container. And if it is valid, it's going to kind of just go through and create it for us. This is a great example here and a great repo that I also reference quite a bit. So while this is loading, that's kind of, again, it's very high level and quick because NodeJS, Kubernetes, and Docker, they can all kind of be separate parts and they can be in a lot more detail. And it would be better to show kind of in the terminal, like how to configure these things. But I wasn't really sure if I'd have enough time to do all that, so I kind of just wanted to give a brief high level what's out there and how it can help. While this is loading, does anyone have any questions or anything like that? So for logging, Kubernetes 1.9 just came out with an audit logging service. Let me see if I can find it. But other than that, so before all the Kubernetes clusters that I set up, you've had to use a third-party service, such as Sysdig, Threat, I want to say Threat, Twistlock, I believe does it. Sysdig definitely does it the best though, because so Sysdig offers two things. One, they give you the ability to log on the host level, and they give you the ability to log inside the pod level. And then they also have an open source project called Falco, which is you can figure that in the pod level, and you can do security rules manually. Like if someone tried to log in as root to my pod, shut it down. Sysdig is definitely the leader in that. But with 1.9, what's in beta right now, or 1.11, sorry, what's in beta right now is auditing, and it's kind of just, but this is more auditing on a level of, I call the Kubernetes pod API and it does something and we log it that way, not necessarily application logging. So those are kind of two different things. Does that answer your question? So when you mean monitoring, are you talking about security monitoring or more application? Yeah, so Sysdig, so this is a common problem that we have on projects is there's no one right answer for that. So typically the security team, they want logging for the host level, and then you have to go to another third party for logging on the pod level, and then another one for logging on the application level itself. Sysdig is definitely where you want to be for the pod level and the host level. They kind of do both. Other than that, there's Twistlock, which does cloud level auditing. And those are kind of the top two I go to. Sysdig, so Sysdig. And the other one is Twistlock. Yeah. Is there any other questions?
Thanks. Yeah, so these different tools and techniques you've been talking about, so this all applies to like vanilla Kubernetes, but once we go to like Google's GKE or Amazon's flavor, how does that differ in what you would do?
Yeah, so Google is actually a part of the Cloud Native Foundation. So Google's Kubernetes is going to be almost as pure as the Kubernetes API as you can get, because they kind of actually develop it. And they, so Google and Azure, they signed up for the Cloud Native Foundation, which means there are strict rules that they must abide by to kind of make it open source for everyone. Amazon's the only one who hasn't signed up for that, so they kind of have their own thing. And so we have noticed with Amazon, most of the 80% of the Kubernetes API is there, but they have some missing pieces that we're trying to get them to fix. But all this stuff works out of the box with just native Kubernetes on it. Whether you're loading up something on custom on Amazon or you're doing the Google Cloud service or the Azure service. Any other questions? We're good? And that's all I got. Yeah, quick. Yep.
Do you have familiarity with Claire as a vulnerability scanner for Docker? And if so, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Claire, if anyone doesn't know, Claire was written by CoreOS. It was like one of the first original vulnerability scanners out there that actually did what it's supposed to do. Red Hat acquired CoreOS, but now Claire is a part of Red Hat. And if you're using something like Quay, Claire is in the background running on that. Basically, what Claire does is it sits on the Docker daemon level. So if I create a new Docker container on my local environment or in a Kubernetes, it listens to the daemon, and when a new Docker container comes up, Claire auto scans it. And that it's kind of like, I'm not gonna say real time detection, but it's specific to the Docker daemon.
And one follow-up. So I'm new to the Bench for Security tool. You know, big fan of CIS benchmarks for a long time. Can you speak to some of the things I've done in Docker security, running as an ordinary user instead of root, removing the SUID flags to make privilege escalation attacks even more difficult, configuring control groups to limit how many resources a container can use, using namespaces in Docker to isolate containers from one another? Do you know if the Bench for Security tool examines for those types of security issues?
Yeah, so again, it goes back to the etcd I mentioned earlier. So if etcd is compromised, that's considered the same as having root access to your cluster. So you definitely want to use role-based access control to limit that and not expose it to the public. But with that, Kubernetes has resource limits, and they also have limit requests. So an example is if I'm being DDoS attacked, for example, I can tell Kubernetes specific pods that I don't want you to go over 32 megabytes of RAM usage. I don't want you to spin up more than 15 of these replicas. And I want to limit the incoming to be 16 megabytes, for example, right? So Kubernetes will allow you to bring 16 megabytes incoming, but if it gets more than that somehow, it maxes at 32, so you kind of have two layers of defense there. That's kind of how I operate on all my pods. That's typically what I do when I work with developers is I want to see how much resources their application needs, which is nowadays it's kind of new for developers because most developers just code. They don't really care how much resources being used, so they have kind of unlimited. But I typically try not to go over 128 megabytes. So because if your application can't run on less than 128 megabytes, then you have a lot of other issues there, especially with microservices nowadays. So you want to configure role-based access controls to lock down etcd, and you want to configure that also on all of your applications, your pods, and your services, so that not one of them can just have admin access to your entire system. And then you also want to limit the resource limits and the limit requests, because those are what's going to stop your cluster from being overran or from, say, Google spinning up 5 other nodes and charging you a big bill. So those are kind of the layers of defense. Did I answer your question?
No other questions? Okay, so we're going to have plenty of time here. So either you can give that time back to you so you can get back. Oh, here, hold on a second.
Just wanted to give Brett a token of appreciation, the OWASP challenge coin.
Thank you.